It must not be a capitalist system, but we don't want to exploit anybody. We don't want to be exploited, and we don't want to exploit anybody.
Ain't nobody going to do it for us. It's nobody outside of yourself, nobody outside of ourselves that's going to do this work for us. We have to put in that real work.
Because the better you are at exploiting people, the more successful you are within capitalism.
We want to say salute to all our political prisoners, our POWs, our elder comrades in exile.
The satisfaction we need as a people only comes through liberation and independence.
Because we're not just building for self, we're building for the family, because the family is broken. We're building for the community is broken. The nation is broken, the race is under attack. We're in a state of emergency.
You're tuned in to the New African.
We always say the Black Panther Party that they can do anything they want to us. We might not be back. I might be in jail. I might be anywhere. But when I leave, you can remember I said with the last words on my lips that I am a revolutionary.
These are the voices of New Africa. These are the voices of New Africa. These are the voices of New Africa. Free in the land, and we ain't asking y'all.
And welcome y'all to another episode of the Voices of New Africa. I am your host, Brother Prophecy, and I got ride with me today is my comrade, our elder, our grandmaster teacher, the one and only, the only one, Grandmaster Fadali. How you doing, Fadali, man?
Everything is going pretty good under these conditions that we live as a people.
Definitely. Y'all got to excuse us. Kind of sharing a screen today. We don't have all our comrade Kakai is not here. He's on like special assignment. Got some things he got going on that he got to take care of, but that's okay. We're gonna make do with what we gonna make do. We just ended the radio portion of our broadcast, and let me remind you, you're listening to and watching the Nava Network, New African Broadcast Association, where we have several programs during the week that is designed to elevate you and spread information about the New African Independence Movement and things of that nature. But with that, like I said, Comrade Kakai is not here today, so Brother Fadali and myself, we're sharing this screen, but we're still gonna make it work. We just ended the radio portion of the broadcast. We had a lively discussion, talked about a lot of good things, a lot of interesting things. We talked about the importance of culture, the importance of understanding yourself, your history, and why the European power structure was so viciously attacked and destroyed, attempted to destroy our culture. We also talked about the importance of really understanding your enemy, understanding his strengths, understanding his weaknesses, understanding their goals and objectives and their motivation, so you can properly defend yourself and attack and defeat this enemy. Because ultimately, we have to understand that we are people who are at war. We are people who was attacked over 400 years ago. The first enslaved, the first African person, the first melanated person who was forcibly placed into a system of chattel slavery, that was an act of war, and we've been fighting a war ever since. And it seems like many of our people today have forgotten that, but it's okay, because we're here to remind us, and we're here to continue this fight until we ultimately gain victory. But what you got to say about some of the things that we talked about on our radio portion of the program?
Yeah, we have to understand that Emil Cabral, in a book called The Return to the Source, points out that that when the enemy began to look at culture, somebody asked Goebbels, who was one of Hitler's men, said, "What do you think about culture? The people, these culture, the people that you're trying to organize, you're trying to overcome, that you're trying to take over." And he said, he pulled up a machine gun called a maximum machine gun. And in America, sometimes they would call them a Gatling gun. So the machine gun was the method by which they were able to conquer, people, the Europeans, and in Africa and places like that, in places like Namibia, which was called Southwest Africa, that was under German control in World War I. But when they lost World War I, they gave Namibia or South Africa over to the South African and British. So what the point on that is that we have to know our enemy. We have to understand our enemy. We must begin to study ourselves and also study our enemies, and then build a plan based on reality, according to Cabral. Cabral, who was the leader of the African Party for the Independence of Guinea and Cape Verde, PAIGC, which became independent in 1975 as a result of the struggle of the people of that particular small area of West Africa. And Cabral was assassinated 2 years before they received their independence from Portugal. And at the same time that Angola and Mozambique received their so-called independence. And so consequently, what we're saying is, these places have remained attached to even the mother country. You know, when we look at the African countries throughout that have gained independence, we find that the enemy still controls the resources and is still controlling the economy and all these things. And our people oftentimes act like they don't know it, you know, but a certain element of our people have become attached to the Queen of England and President of France and whatever, Portugal. So what we have to do is understand that in who the enemy is, so that we can begin to break off. And here we are in New Africa, you know, in the United States, so-called United States of America, and we're talking about we're having our five states, you know, as being our nation of state, and we have a provisional government and all those things, but many of us are still hanging on to being a part of the slave state that has held us in slavery for so long, and that's still holding us right now, even today, and even preventing us from being able to acquire Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and
Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama,
South Carolina.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know why we couldn't take South Carolina, because we're having a conference in South Carolina. So these are the kind of things that we have to begin, you know, to understand, and so because a lot of times we think that we can isolate ourselves, we can separate ourselves completely, you know, from any world events other than what we are trying to do. But no, we're going to have alliances. We're going to have a foreign policy. We're going to have economic policy that is going to affect, you know, the whole world. And because we're being affected even now by you know, so-called world economy, and particularly capitalist economy from the Europeans and the United States. So whatever our relationship that we are going to have to forge, you're going to have to be a result of our understanding of our study of the economic system and study of the political system that's in the world today. And that's basically what we're talking about. We're talking about the various tricks that have been played to keep us separated and to keep us from being able to move toward that. So we got a lot of people who think that they can just negotiate, that we can negotiate our way out of this. But as Brother Prophet pointed out, we have been in war for 400 years or more. 500 years or more. And so consequently, you know, it's not going to be no easy negotiations when we are able to get our nation state, you know, like Jamaica has is, like, you know, Haiti has is, like Nigeria has is. All of these things that we have to begin to understand with that in the context of what we're doing. And then but we must link up with all the forces, you know, the positive forces that are out there, so to help us facilitate our, you know, and even though the UN is an umbrella for the United States for a lot of activity, it's still many nations in the United. We have to go ourselves out and extend ourselves to the other nations and states so they can recognize us, you know, recognize the Republic of New Africa as another state within the world circle of states. And we have to do everything that be possible for us to have communication among ourselves, so we can let people know we exist.
Mm-hmm. You said a whole lot. I'm going to kind of jump into and kind of maybe rewind a little bit. You spoke of Cabral,
Yes.
and Benny, was it Benny? He was. You used, man, let me get my wording right. You spoke of, and earlier you talked about how he was educated in Portugal by the Portuguese, and so he received education, so he understood the culture and the systems of the Portuguese, of his enemies, as well as understanding his own culture. And that was one of the things that gave him like a strategic advantage and allowed him to be successful against his enemy. And I think in the book of Sun Tzu, the Art of War, it says it says, know thyself, know thy enemy, 1,000 battles, 1,000 victories. Basically saying, you know yourself and you know your enemy, you increase your probability of success, tenfold. And we talked about the importance of understanding and studying the enemy, the tactics, the goals and objectives, because if you don't properly analyze that and study it, then you can be victimized by the enemy and not even realize it. Even if you gain liberation, you can still be doing the biddings of the oppressor and not even realize it. Now, maybe you do realize it and you're just trying to continue on the system. If we don't understand that, like, the goals and objective of this white power structure is not necessarily to hate you because you black, but it's to exploit the land, the resources, the labor, in order for them to gain riches, influence, and power, and things of this nature. If we don't understand that, and we think, okay, well, they no longer hate us anymore. They're getting locked up because when they kill us now, so everything is great, and not understanding that they're still exploiting us. The power dynamic, the power relationship still exists, and we still don't own any land or resources. We still have no control over the institutions in our communities. So therefore, the relationships still exist. They're still gaining power and influence off of our labor, our energy, our intelligence, our efforts. Is all going to them. I think we were talking earlier, individuals said how much, what he said, the gross national product of black people, so many trillions of dollars, and
right.
Like that'd be fine and great, that black people have this much money flowing out of our community, but if it doesn't stay in our community, if this money is not used to build up our community, then it ain't useful. It's not useful for us. You know what I'm saying? We might as well have a $0 whatever, because this money that we're having is going to benefit other people who have been trained and conditioned to exploit us, and that's one of the big natures of the problem, is that black people in America have been used to be exploited, and we've been educated to offer up our bodies, our efforts, our resources for the exploitation of other people. So that's why we have to create institutions. That's why we are struggling. The ultimate goal is for nationhood. So we can do for self, and this so many trillions of dollars can be used to build our own nation up instead of building other people up. And I'll yield for that.
Yeah. So when we talk about the situation of the enemy and how the enemy is controlling our economy and controlling everything we're doing, and also have us disparage our culture. Mm-hmm. Because there's a lot of Africans, a lot of blacks throughout the world that don't want to identify as being black or being African, and so to the point of where they have divided us up, even the sub group within the African continent, or African people within the world, whether we're Jamaican or whether we're Haitian or whether we're so-called American, and all these things, and show that, in other words, so dissent and makes us not be able to come together. And the reality is that we don't own any real power in terms of bank. We don't, even if we talk about America, there's no bank that all Africans can go to put their money, if they wanted to invest and we have companies and businesses and all that to invest. We don't have even a bank that that we should have to be able to put our money in and to invest in other things in other areas of the world. And this has always been a problem that they've created, because when Garvey, back in the days of Garvey in the 1920s, was attempting to, had a Black Star Line ships and stuff, and talking about going among throughout South America and trying to trade and all that. All that was smashed, through the enemy, and how the enemy, because the enemy studies us. We need to study the enemy like they study us. The enemy study us to see if we are, together, if we are, are still divided and all that. And they know in world history and world economy that we are not, we have not come together as a people, not even in one so-called state, independent state. And they're controlling the resources in all those states that have become independent. And even if we talk about places like Jamaica where they're doing touristy and all that, but you got the Bauxite industry that's still been controlled, by people outside of Jamaica, the British or whoever. So these are the kind of things that we talk about in terms of saying that we have to study ourselves, study our enemy. And that way we'll be able to organize ourselves and become together and united. And we have to have a foreign policy. Our foreign policy has to promote us, as a people, that we are new African people, and that we, in other words, that recognize our nation, recognize our nation, and inside we must create the avenues such as newspapers and magazines and other films or whatever that's going to do with communication, so that we can communicate to each other to what our goals, objectives should be, so that the people themselves know that we exist. Because even in the United States, there's a whole lot of people who do not know that the Republic of New Africa exists.
And that's a really good point. And like I said, I got to, look over the fact that we just kind of sharing this one camera angle. Our comrade who usually has the material for General Fadali, he's not here, so it's just Fadali and myself. But everybody out there watching, give us a like. Make sure you drop a comment, trying to let us know who's out there, so we can converse with everybody properly. The Voices of New Africa is not just Brother Prophecy or Brother Fadali's voices, all of our voices. So we want to collectively have that conversation, so we can gain a better solution. You know what I'm saying? It's a collective work. Everything from the African tradition. Even when we write, we capitalize the W in we, and we use a small I when referring to ourselves. And because we put the collective, the group, the organization above the individual, so that holds true for this show also. So everybody out there, drop us a like, drop us a comment, so we can know who you are. And we can continue the goals and objective in, of liberating our people. But you said something. You were talking about one of Hitler's generals when he was asked about culture. How do you deal with culture, or the culture of the people that they were trying to colonize? And this general, what was that general name again? Goebbels. The general respond by holding up a Gatling gun. Everybody know a Gatling gun. A Gatling gun is a serious weapon. It is used to mow down hundreds of people at a time. And basically what he was saying is, we deal with the people that we are conquering's culture by destroying the culture. And in essence, he's admitting the importance that culture plays to a people. And I think Marcus Garvey has a famous quote, like, a people who lacks the knowledge of the history of themselves is like a tree without roots. And a tree that doesn't have roots can't survive, it dies. So, like, what is the importance, in your opinion, of culture and knowing your culture and really producing a culture that benefits for us. Because when I look out now at the current state of our community, there are a lot of elements of our culture that were manufactured and socially engineered for us in order to make us better suited to be enslaved, or better suited to be exploited by a white power structure, and really neutralize a potential rebellious threat for us. And I look at, I just listen to the music, how the music celebrates the murder of ourselves and the disrespect of women. So with that, what in your opinion, what are some of the, why is culture so important, to us as a people or any people?
Well, culture is the center of all. If you deal with culture, you got to say history, because your history is determines what what you want to do, how you're going to be able. So, when the first thing that the European did when they stepped off the ships in some areas, such as Mozambique, they had the French had the Catholic priests, walking beside them or walking behind them, and they came in and they canceled out the religion of the people by saying y'all all are Christians. If you're not Christians, then you're gonna die. So consequently, when we look if you look at every instance, the missionary became the avenue through which people were transformed from their traditional religion to the European oriented called Christianity, or even in some cases Islam became the religion, and African culture was obliterated. When they came to Mexico and places like that, they basically destroyed the beliefs and things of the people, and they became Spanish. They even in many instances destroyed the languages because they intermingled and intermarried, among the people. And in Africa, the same thing. We look at the situations there when they first came in, and also when they came with pistols and rifles and all that, they did forced to work forced to work laws. In other words, because they couldn't get the African men to come in to work in the concerns and things they had set up. So they basically locked up men to be able to work. In America, we saw people being after chattel slavery. We saw chattel slavery being the work process, and so consequently they had to do everything they could to keep you from speaking your language, to keep you from reading, even learning how to read, how to do things. But at the same time, we don't think that we were completely and totally blotted out of our culture, because your culture is more than what you speak and what you write, or what your culture is in your ultimate being, but you could not reveal it. So consequently, they were able to do everything they could to belittle our culture. Okay, to move it, like if you're talking about, in the 20th century, move it, Gone with the Wind. Almost every movie that they, and different little movies where they advocated lynching of African people, and African people became lynched in the 20th century in the United States, as a result of the movies, the first movies that they showed.
In fact, the first blockbuster movie in America was a movie called The Birth of a Nation, and it was about the rise of the Ku Klux Klan. And in the essence, the premise of it was, Black people had been freed from this glorious institution of slavery, and we're just running around causing havoc, raping all the white women, destroying everybody. And they had an epic scene in this movie where this Black dude, which was played by a white man in blackface, was chasing after this white woman because he wanted some of that good old white stuff. He was finna rape her, and she was running to the edge of a cliff, and she looked back at the uncivilized Black man, and she said, death is better than being raped by this savage, and she jumped off of the cliff, and there was like a dramatic scene in the movie. And this movie, actually this movie actually was shown at the White House. You know, it was a blockbuster. So all of these blockbuster films that you have today is Genesis live within a movie that was deep into the system and ideology of white supremacy. You know, because like in the movie, the hero, the protagonist were the Ku Klux Klan, because they were the one that rose to power to defeat the evil black people, you know, and whatnot. And you know, so Hollywood has a history of perpetuating negative stereotypes that have had extremely negative consequences to us. In fact, I think it was a Jewish guy who was a producer who went and funded that movie and is responsible for the movie being so successful. So, you know, a lot of people say, well, there are Jewish people in Hollywood who benefit from the exploitation of our people, creating movies that exploit our people and have negative consequences to us. Well, you know, it's an example, you know, from the beginning that could be possibly true, but you get in trouble for saying stuff like that, you know. So yeah, but I mean, I wasn't trying to cut you out, but yeah, that's a long,
great.
Yeah, that's a long,
Great segue there.
Yeah, that's a long history of Hollywood perpetuating negative stereotypes and negative narratives. That's why it's important for us to do for itself, to create our own movies, to create our own media platform. That's what we're trying to do here. And interesting enough, just on our last program on Conversation Between Comrades, we actually talked about a movie that just came out called Emancipation. It was dealing with the issue of enslavement, and it told the story of this brother by the name of Peter. All we know is Peter in the history, but he took a photograph of him with his back turned, and you showed where he had been beaten and brutalized. Right. His back was basically just chopped up and just terrible. And this photograph became very famous, you know, and it was used to gain sentiment for the anti-slavery movement. But yeah, the movie is based on this individual telling, you know, his story of how he freed himself, ran away, and things of that nature. And in that movie, it actually did a good job of talking about or exposing some of the things that you just talked about, how the colonizers took away our religion and forced us to believe in this Christian religion. And they didn't do that to save our souls. They did that so it would better make us more suitable to be enslaved. It would pacify us. And in this movie, while the African brothers and sisters were being enslaved on this military camp, you had individuals quoting the Bible, saying, slaves, obey your master as you would obey Christ, and all of these type of things. So it had a lot of, little things in the movie that I consider to be teachable moments with that. And that was Emancipation. You haven't had an opportunity to check out that episode. Go back to Nava and check out the episode. We talked about that, had a good discussion. And when we talked about Christianity, that portion, it led to a lively discussion, a big discussion, because we've been so heavily indoctrinated into the Christian belief system that we hold on. We've been indoctrinated into so many of the colonizers and the enslavers' customs and tradition that we hold on to it, and we'll fight to defend it, even though it was not given to us for any purpose to benefit us. It was given to us to better enslave us. And it reminds me of a quote from our great freedom fighter, sister, Queen Mother, Harriet Tubman. She said, she helped free hundreds of enslaved people. I think she said hundreds, but a lot of enslaved people. But I could free a whole lot more if they only knew that they were enslaved, that they were slaves. Because a big part of this system of chattel slavery, of exploitation, is a psychological thing. You can get freed from the physical shackles of chattel slavery, but we still got to deal with the psychological effects of this system that we've been under for hundreds and hundreds of years, that have told us that we have nothing, that we are nothing. In their legal system, they have told us that we are nothing. They said, in the 3-5 compromise and the Constitution that we're only representing 3/5 of a human being. They told us in the Dred Scott decision that there is no right that a black man has that a white man has to acknowledge, or or has to respect. So even within their legal system, in their constitution, they have defined us as being less than nothing, and that plays a tremendous psychological toll on our people. And we got to deal with that. Even when you talk about the idea, the concept of reparations, which people are starting to talk about that. You can't just talk about, give them a check. You got to properly examine what has happened to our people, and that's something that, we like to just brush under the rug. But, like you said, they purposely forced us to to give up our culture, our history, our belief system, all of these things. And then they demonized it, in every aspect of life. When you look at the movies, when you look at the Tarzan movies, you go to Africa, one white dude who was there by mistake, got left there by mistake and raised by apes, were able to conquer all the Africans, in the land because they was uncivilized. And this Tarzan dude was just, whooping everybody but, so yeah, there was a long history of the exploitation of our people and the perpetuation of negative stereotypes in order to make this white supremacist system run more effectively and to help to neutralize a potential threat that we represent in this country, but I'll yield on that.
Yeah. So Edward Burrow Rice, who was the author of Tarzan, who made millions of dollars, never traveled to Africa. The book called Tarzan, written in Britain, and all the movies, basically came from that book. But when we talk about culture, when I was coming up in the 50s and 60s, we didn't have anything in our books to say, when we looked at the textbooks and anything like that about African people, or if you had a geography book, they may have a half-naked African, so-called native in the geography book. You never did get to Africa in the geography book. But by the same token, we had a movement, and the movement said, we were saying black is beautiful. We were saying black is, in other words, where we moved to the point of saying James Brown to sing the song, "I'm Black, I'm Proud." So there was a movement of black consciousness that was occurring, and that we were not aware, that by 1966, it had reached its peak under Black Power. Just understanding the importance of culture, in other words, understanding that we identified ourselves together as black people, and ultimately we said African, we're African. We started saying Pan-Africanism. This was in the 1960s and 1970s, up until the 1980s. And we started wearing our hair natural, called an afro in many instances, people call it. And so when I was a child, like I said, prior to that, if you were a boy, you had to have your hair cut to the skin. Almost. I'm just saying you had little, naps and hair. And so these are the kind of things I'm saying. And so, but the movement had migrated into the mass of the people and was able to influence the mass of the people. That's why we are today. Why we are able to say New Africa and all these things, because in spite of every effort that they made to make us deny our culture, make us say in other words that we were not, that we were niggas, that we were this, that, and other, using that phrase as saying, and then they said Negro. It had the NAACP and all the organizations had us saying Negro, we're Negro. But by 1966, we stopped saying Negro. We stopped using the word Negro. It became a Negro, which is a Portuguese and Spanish word that means black. Had been corrupted to the point where they made us niggas, to the point where so we in other words we threw that whole Negro discussion out, the Negro question out, and to the point of where we are today. But today these terms have come back, they have creeped back in, to our language, so when the brother was talking about what's happening in the raps and different things like that, we have that same terminology that we have been described there by European being said more by us, and then we have people when it was a fighting word. When I was a young, somebody be called a black, it was a fighting word, and so we have to look at those transfer, and so and then we don't want to identify with Africa. We say those Africans over there, and we had to bring in Nigerians and stuff out at Memphis State University at that time, to say, what is it, what's the deal? They're saying this over on one side of Atlanta. They're saying we don't want y'all don't want us, and then they're telling you we don't want to go back because y'all sold us. Mm-hmm. So that whole mentality of slavery, it was enforced throughout the world to African people. But colonization was nothing but a form of slavery that occurred because they were able to enslave us and bring us over to America, to bring us over to the Western Hemisphere. And so almost all people, African people in the Western Hemisphere that were born in the Western Hemisphere came off of the so-called slave, Europeans, I call it the European slave trade, mm-hmm. which was an extortion. But of Africans from by certain groups of people that was on the but they did not. There was no trade. Where you call trade, you're thinking that they got an equal. What did it get?
Equal exchange.
Equal exchange. What they did was they enslaved. They turned over people that they were fighting. Africans were fighting each other, mm-hmm. and they would turn over the people who were captured in the fight to the Europeans. And Europeans call it the African slave trade. Mm-hmm. And so we got to begin to look at it, talk about these terms so that we'll be able to be resolved. And even in Africa itself, in Ghana and places like that, people have been, awarded land and different things because of what some of our ancestors had did in terms of turning over us mm-hmm. over to them. And so consequently, but the overall fault of all of it goes back to the European. The European left his place in search of gold. Mm-hmm. If you go back and look at all the stories of the European colonies, you go back to Columbus and go back to Prince Henry of Portugal and all those people like that went to the Pope and got the Pope to agree to that Africans were going to be the slaves. You go back to understanding that they couldn't get to China, they couldn't get to Japan east, so therefore they went west, and then in west they had gone along the west coast of Africa all the way around Africa, and had captured people and took them over to what the Pope had designated as being the land of the Europeans. Mm-hmm. That was Brazil and Western Hemisphere, and the islands, and so Portugal got Brazil, and Spain got all the rest of the South American continent. Mm-hmm. And as a result of a trade, them trading some Africans to the Pope. Mm-hmm. That was in 1492 plus, 1440 past 1492.
Yeah, I think it was Capricorn started with his Prince Henry when he gave the Pope a gift of 2-3 African slaves, and for the next 40 or so years, you see the rise that the slave. I never knew the details about that. The Portuguese giving Brazil, and then Spain giving the rest.
Okay, Ferdinand and Isabella mm-hmm. came to power in 1492. This is the same time that Columbus came over from wherever he came from. Columbus was the biggest liar in history. Mm-hmm. But Ferdinand and Isabella, were the first one to commission a ship for Columbus, to come to America. So. But even prior to that, Ferdinand, the disciples of Ferdinand and was that Spain became had reconquered this territory, had kicked Moors and stuff out of, and so the Africans, the first Africans that were enslaved by the Spanish were Moors, people who were like Muslims, who had conquered Spain 700 years before.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So consequently, when we talk about looking at the European and the so-called what I call the European slave trade, sometimes they call it the Atlantic slave trade. This is where they were able to penetrate into the rest of Africa, during this period of time, when they were doing chattel slavery. In the early 1800s, they were able to go into Algeria and places like that. I think Algeria was conquered by the French in 1830, and then they had a later rush to Africa. I mean, what they call that? The Berlin Conference in 1884, 1885, in which they got the bulk of Africa after that between 1885 and 2000. And 1914. By 1914, they had captured all African, territories except for what they call Abyssinia, what they call Ethiopia, right today. And so consequently, what I'm saying is, this is the conditions that we're looking at in 1914. This is where Garvey, came into existence, and different, and was saying Africa for the African at home and and abroad. And where, we start saying, where's the black man's government? That's what Garvey, asked the question. Where's the black man's army? Where's the black man? So today, we're saying here, in the Republic of New Africa, where, when we have an army that we are constructing. We're having, we got a government that we have constructed. We got all kinds of decorations and things that that declare, and consequently, and then we're making contact with the UN and other nations, so we'll begin to have our own individual nation state and recognized by many in the world. But I want to say that when this goes back down to the question of culture, because we have a numerous number of African states throughout the world, and the diaspora. We got Africa, the diaspora, and until we understand that we are one people and one culture, to the extent that we're going to have a new economy in the world, then we have to begin on the foundation of African culture, of Black culture, of new African culture. The new African culture will be what has been reconstructed as a result of being destroyed by the chattel slave system.
You just dropped a whole lot of information. Great history lesson. I want to go back to the history lesson because you brought up some stuff that I was thought about, like, man, yeah, okay, that all connects, because you refer to like the rise of what you said, Ferdinand and Isabella, after Spain was able to finally defeat the Moors. And a lot of people don't understand the history of the Moors, especially the ones who conquered Spain. And they ruled Spain for like 700-800 years or something like that. Yeah, 700 years. And understand, at the time that the Moors came into Spain, Europe was going through the Dark Ages. And a lot of people credit the Moors. And first of all, Moors are from North Africa. Right. You know what I'm saying? Especially during that time period, you're talking about Black people. Right. But during that time period, when the Moors came into Spain, Europe was going through a dark age, and it's like 99% of Europe was illiterate, couldn't read or write. And the Moors were responsible for bringing universities and libraries and culture and art and education to Europe. And many people credit the Moors with bringing Europe out of the Dark Ages, right. Which historically we don't get credit for that. I actually remember I took a Spanish class, and You know, I actually had a good Spanish teacher because we was talking about Spanish culture. We was going through a whole bunch of stuff that nobody give a damn about, and he knew that. Yeah. And once he got to the Moors started, he was like, "Look, everybody, listen, it's the Moors. Look, y'all pay attention. This is about y'all." You know, and he wasn't even a black dude. You know, right. And I didn't, you know, at the time, because I was just like 7th grade, I didn't even understand exactly what he was talking about, but I peeped it out. I was like, okay, that's kind of cool, you know. But I appreciate him more now that I know more of the history. But it was so the defeat of the Moors was a very significant event in European history because it kind of led them to come up and really engage into this European slave trade, which you call it. Yeah, that's interesting, and
that's how Prince Henry came into because they had conquered Portugal also,
mm-hmm.
and Prince Henry, became the king of Portugal,
mm-hmm.
and he, they was able to sail around too, where the Pope was, So when we look at that whole thing, we can see that the 1492, 1440, and 1492 were critical areas for the Europeans to come, out of what they call the Dark Ages.
Mm-hmm.
And so consequently, they were able to travel outside of their nations and became engaged in what they call what I call a European slave trade, a so-called mm-hmm. Atlantic slave trade.
Yeah.
Where Britain following Spain and Portugal, because Britain and Holland and what they call the Dutch, Holland, mm-hmm. and France, and all of them came into raiding the French and Portuguese, ships and stuff, take the slaves off, and then they themselves went and made their own route to West Africa, mm-hmm. and under the so-called demand of free trade, mm-hmm. they were able to, force the whoever that was selling slaves to be able to continue because they all be enslaved themselves. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't the kings and queens of Africa selling their brothers and sisters and all that. It was wars. So even when they went to those places, they had weapons and stuff for them to fight against, their so-called enemies. And when they defeated the enemies, they were turned over as slaves, mm-hmm. to the European,
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand that. That piece of information that you just gave, because first of all, because like there's a lot of people who will say, well, Africa, you was enslaving your own brothers and sisters in Africa, and we have to understand that like the institution of slavery, it existed in Africa. It's actually ancient. That's one reason why we make that distinction between chattel slavery, because chattel slavery did not exist in Africa. In Africa, what existed in Africa, you look at that as just like some form of not even bad as indentured servant. It was like the 3 ways in which you could be a slave in Africa would be as a prisoner of war, which you just talked about. You owe somebody a debt, so you worked off your debt to an individual by working for him, or you committed a crime. So you paid out your so-called debt to society by, working for free, but you ain't working for free, you working to pay off a debt. These were the 3 ways. And then once you completed, the terms of, whatever, then you were free. And in many cases, you just became a regular member of society, and you can gain and rise and get statue. There are examples of individuals who were enslaved in African society, gained their freedom and became king, so it's a difference. So when you look at individuals engaging with Europeans and turning over captives, what the European people did is on a whole different level. They created a system where you were enslaved for life, and you were considered to be property. And your children were considered to be property, and your grandchildren were considered to be property. And it was a perpetuating cycle that basically never ended, and you couldn't get out of. So we can't really compare what happened with our brothers and sisters in Africa with what these European people do, which people try to, just try to put it off on, African people is, oh, they're responsible, or we're responsible for our own enslavement. It's important to understand it. No, it's something completely different. And as you said, in many situations, our African kingdoms who basically, if you were not turning over your captives to these Europeans, then they themselves would be enslaved.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So this whole slave trade thing was a vicious cycle that decimated Africa in many different ways, in ways that are not, fully examined and studied as it should be. But yeah, I just had to point that out.
And some historians say, that Africa lost about 400 million people in that period of time, in that period of colonization and chattel slavery. The population. So the population of Africa would be much larger today if it were not for the institution of slavery. These, so consequently, when we talk about the Moors, and that's Morocco. And Morocco is a land base where the Moors operated from when they conquered Spain. All of these areas have been affected even today, by loss of African population, and some Africans are now returning to places like Morocco and places like that. But the Arab intrusion from 700 became the other operation, in which we were displaced from places like Egypt and Libya and places like that. I think that what we're talking about is trying to, as a nation ourselves, begin to know what the relationship is, and what it should be, and how we should be able to, and with the $1 trillion of so-called economy that we're supposed to have, that if we are ever able to unleash any of that, for ourselves, it will be in our foreign policy and trying to link up all Africans together ultimately.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, you just to kind of, bring it back to, our whole goals and our objective is, we study these things so we can understand how we should navigate and move to the road of ultimate liberation, which, is the fight for land, independence, self-determination, self-government, and create an economic system that ain't based on exploiting everybody, exploitation of man by man. Right. That's the ultimate goal, and is important. And to return to, the original point in the subject of the topic today, that's why we have to study our enemy. We have to study our history. We have to study the history of the colonizer, and study those things that made him effective, like how we were effective. And I know you said earlier, and I can't remember exactly how you said it, but it's important that, as African people, we start all identify with ourselves. And we have to try to get away from all of these things that are dividing us, that are, making it very difficult for us to benefit from our collective efforts in defeating these people, these really systems that have been exploiting us for so many centuries. That's one of the reasons why Europeans were successful in their European slave trade, because you had so many different nations in Africa, and you didn't have just one national identity in Africa.
Right. Right. The nation state, the European nation state is a modern so-called nation state. In other words, and so in Africa we had various types of entities, such as some are classified as empire, Ghana, Mali, and Songhai, then you had Egypt, the Pharaohs, with the Pharaoh, and you had what they've done, they've colonized all of these areas in Africa into little tiny nation states, and in many instances, except for maybe Nigeria, maybe South Africa, Congo. Congo is like maybe size of France or something like that in Africa. So consequently, with this European nation state, we have not got to the point where we have a united African Republic. Like you got what they call Europe, United Europe, and you got a United so-called States of America. So consequently, the African Union is the hope for African unity in the past, in the present. I mean, the future.
Yeah.
When Africans like Nkrumah formed the Organization of African Unity, they thought that it was going to, that they were going to come together, but they got split apart by this thing about not interfering in other people's territory.
Yeah.
And so therefore, military coup after military coup that was being, that the former colonizers had promoted, caused Africa to split apart, throughout, and nobody could do anything about it because they had an organization that couldn't interfere, And so when Nkrumah was trying to help Lumumba, this would stopped, Nkrumah and Sekou Touré and others that were trying to help Lumumba before he got assassinated. When Lumumba became president of the Congo, which is the richest area of Africa, so they were able, and the other thing that stopped Nkrumah was that he did not change his troops. He still had the European troops that Britain, when the British got their independence in 57, Ghana got its independence in 57, it still had a British army, over the government and all that. It was not till 57 that they were able to consolidate the government. I think from 51 to 57, about 6 years, when Nkrumah was in jail and they took him out and he made president of Ghana or whatever, leader of Ghana. And he was doing it in coordination with the colonial powers.
Yeah.
They were doing an equal, kind of an equal sharing, but the army was still a British, army. So they did not protect Lumumba. Lumumba was assassinated, right in front of, and Guinea pulled out of the United Nations, protested against the assassination of Lumumba at that time. And so, and even today we have military forces, in all the African states. We look at, go back to the so-called mother country, Britain and France, in the United States. There was a warning about the United States in a book called The Wretched of the Earth by Frank Fanon. In the last chapter, he talked about a young nation that was going to take, because the United States had a claim not to be a colonializer, not to have a colony. Although they had Liberia. Liberia was a neo-colony, And so consequently, when we look at the United States, a lot of Africa look at the United States as being, they'll come in and be like their savior. That's how we got caught up in the World Bank and the, international, monetary fund and all those things, through loans that came from the, United States through those agents, And so today, many nations, African nations, is, indebted, to those institutions outside. They don't have control of the economy at any level other than debt.
So, like, and just say, am I correct? Because, like, basically, like what you're saying, being that the United States, basically had this claim that, well, we're not doing the business as usual. We're not trying to colonize the world, or we're not trying to do these things. It seems like what the United States did is revolutionize the whole principles and ideas behind colonization, because instead of just going out there and taking your land physically, they went and they did it through the economic system. Right. They said, well, okay, we ain't just gonna force you to turn over your land, but we're gonna give you money that you with such a bad deal that you're gonna owe us sovereignty into your own country, with these World Banks and IMF contracts that you have to sign. And people, when you do a study on, all the African nations who signed these agreements with the World Bank and the UN, the monetary fund,
international monetary
IMF, are those individuals, all those countries, basically suffer, and it was like a slick trick. So it seemed like the United States really ushered in a new era of imperialism, updated it, modernized it, and made it more effective, where you ain't got to get your hands as bloody, because you control the country through neo-colonial methods and controlling the money, the economic system, and controlling the industries that feed the lifeline of the country, which give you a direct line. In what you said about the military base, and when Barack Obama was in office, they had this strong campaign called African.
It's a command, African command.
Government, which basically, set up, military bases damn near everywhere in Africa.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Which basically means that at any point in time, if any nation gets out of line within the interest of the United States, your military is already there ready to attack them.
They're already there attacking already, in places like, Mali, because they said they're going after the people who are so-called Al-Qaeda, people. And what's happening is, like, we talk about the United States. Malcolm X warned about that when he talked about Kennedy, about Kennedy, that fox, in other words, coming into the African nations and, beginning to lure them into, relationships, with the United States. The United States has a lot of United States so-called aid going to, supposed to be aid going to the African countries, and that they got to repay, that they're repaying. These are the kind of things that we have to look at in terms of understanding. And then the Chinese at one point in time was doing building roads and stuff, and in the African country without any tax or whatever to it, But I think right now, even all nations who are coming to try to do with a so-called underdeveloped, what they call underdeveloped nations, have established a relationship which they begin to owe those countries. But the United States is the most important one of all, because it has military bases in almost every area, which it extends any kind of loan or anything like that, even if it's not through the International Monetary Fund.
And they got to go right back to what we're talking about, knowing your enemy, because like basically everything what you're talking about, these are people who are coming to these so-called third world nations or underdeveloped nations with their hand out and extended, saying, we're trying to help you out. We're trying to, develop you. We're going to give you money to build infrastructure and all of these type of things. But at the end of the day, they end up owing. And these European westernized countries ultimately gain access to the resources of these nations, which is the whole point of what they were trying to do in the first place. It's just like a more efficient, effective, more intellectual means of imperialism. And actually it has less human life that you have to risk, because you ain't initially coming in with your army. You know what I'm saying? You only do that when the people get hip enough and they want the amount of resistance to what you're doing is a threat to your program. That's when they got their military there to do it, and they use some kind of like, we're trying to stop terrorism. You got Al Qaeda over here or whatever type of justification that you want to put out in order to make sure that your so-called interest is protected, even if that means the detriment of the country. And these things go all over, all over Africa. Most of the wars, most of the drama that you see in Africa are always in places where you have vast amounts of natural resources. And
any threat that they have to organize to build socialism. For example, in 1965, the United States sent the Marines to Dominican Republic, because they were getting ready to elect a president that was a socialist. They stopped that. The United States did. And then in 1983, where Reagan went to Grenada, you know, and you know Grenada, the little island, the British, and they went in, and after Maurice Bishop got, you know, killed, and supposedly said they had some medical, because they had little medical things there, you know, to rescue them. But really they went to keep Cuba from building an air, you know, base and all that on Grenada, and so consequently they took out the whole leadership. The new, you know, the party that you know supposedly killed Maurice and took them to Britain and hung some of them, you know, in Britain. So these are the kind of things that we have to be aware in terms of an enemy, to understand what the enemy. And any in Liberia, when you know Liberia had Sam Doe and all that, you know, because they have misguided us to the point that we became missionaries in places like Liberia instead of the, you know, part of the people who we are. We often became part of, you know, the enemy's mechanizations in Liberia, because you got gold, you got what do you call it, oil, not oil, you got what's that? Oil in Firestone Rubber Company, excuse me, in Liberia. You know, so you know the United States interest is still in Liberia, you know, behind the private companies. It's called.
What is the history with Liberia? Because I mean, if I remember correctly, there was like some Americans that was sent over there to
no.
What is
Liberia? Okay, Liberia is Africans that want to return. To Africa. And so in
Africans in America.
Africans who came settling, you know, who were in America, who wanted to go back to Africa, wanted to go back home. And so Paul Cuffey in the early 1800s, I mean early 1900s, was a guy that he was had a boat that he was taking people from, you know, America to Liberia. But in 1823, in 1820, James Monroe became president. So he basically allowed a ship of Africans from America to go, and they moved to Liberia. They set up the capital and called it Monrovia after James Monroe, right? And so many of them were missionaries, and instead of them mingling in, merging in, they wanted to be over. They were Christianized. They wanted to Christianize the Africans, the rest of the Africans, and So for a long time, they became the rulers of. You had some good things that came out of Liberia around black, trying to pull all the Africans together. You had people like Edward Wilmot Blyden, who came out of Trinidad and moved to Liberia, in that period of time, and became one of the foremost so-called you call it pan-Negro, revolution. In other words, talking about, and he wrote a book called Christianity and Islam, which he showed the effect of Islam and Christianity in Liberia. Okay, so now, but these people came settled in. So Tubman, and they said it might be Harriet Tubman's relatives or some, moved to Liberia, and the last one became president. His name was William Tubman, and instead of them mingling in with the people, they wound up being overthrown by Samuel Doe in the 1970s. Was it 1970s, 1980s? I can't think. It was recent, fairly recent. And so so this is what happened in all the places where they have people who have been transplanted. Instead of them penetrating into, the country, they decided they were going to just take it over, because these people are uncivilized, so which means unchristianized. So you have missionary. It became a missionary base, and so this is the only country that was African that were allowed from the United States to go. Sierra Leone was another area where Britain had dropped some people that were slave ships.
How did the U.S. obtain control over Liberia?
And I think it had to be through Britain. It had to be through, you know, where they purchased you know, because it's in West Africa, right next to Ghana and place like that. So they didn't go in and conquer.
So it was like a British, maybe a British territory,
right.
And they negotiated with Britain to gain control of it. Okay,
right.
All right. So like in essence, what you're like saying that, you know, it's like at some point, it was decided, well, we're gonna some African people from Americas, from like probably former enslaved African people, will want to return back to Africa, and I guess throughout the under the, you know, umbrella of the United States, we'll send almost like a colonizing program.
Okay, so this is what it is. They wanted to get rid of. They wanted to get rid of all educated Africans that was in America. You know, that was it. You know. That was called the abolition movement. The abolition movement was, in tow. So therefore, that was a strategy by the Southern. It was supported by the Southerners, because you know, James Monroe was a president of the United States. He was a slave owner.
Yeah.
Okay, so some people in the elements of the South basically, the American Colonization Society, and these were Europeans. And the Europeans, you know, financed a way for the Africans to leave and go to Liberia. They bought, somehow they got control of that area, what is called Liberia. And then they transported the Africans. Yeah, and all the Africans that wanted to leave, but you know, in other words, because they wanted to get rid of them because Africans were escaping from slavery. Yeah.
So what year was this?
It was in 1823.
So this is before the end of slavery.
Right, before the end of slavery. Okay. 1823.
So it's almost like okay, preemptive measures to deal with the so-called Negro problem. What you
in the North?
Yeah, in the North. Okay, what you're gonna do with these Africans who are a potential threat to the society? So you take the educated ones who could potentially lead a revolution against, you know, be the leadership of, because we said, you know, cut off the head.
Anti-slavery.
Yeah. You know, so you take these Africans and you move them to another land, to Liberia. But these Africans who still have a colonized mindset, take that same colonized mindset over there.
Many of missionaries.
Yeah, you know, through their missionary program, their religious programs, and instead of, you know, building with the people and helping the people, you know, to thrive and mingling with them, they exploited the people, similar to how the United States would do, which goes kind of back to what we're talking about, understanding your enemy, understanding the systems, understanding all of that. Because if you don't, even if we gain liberation, if we still have that same mindset and the same system, we'll do just like the brothers and sisters who went to Liberia did, and go and oppress the people, and we'll oppress our own people, and we'll just trade a white colonizer for a black colonizer. And what we're not trying to be. I appreciate that. I was always wondering about the details of that. You know what I'm saying? That's why we always got to give our elders our flowers right here, because he's just like literally, this ain't even been a show to me. I just been sitting back educating, you know, learning, and I do appreciate that. But we've been here for over an hour, and about get out of here. I appreciate everybody for tuning in. Make sure y'all share this program. Make sure y'all comment and give us likes and let everybody know that we're doing this. So I'm gonna leave a last word with you. What you want to leave?
I think that we who are organizing at this time of this era, this period, have to understand that we are going to be able to be successful because we will be able to communicate with the greatest number of people, you know, because the fact is that we are basically have been educated and miseducated to the extent that, to the point, that's why we have to begin to understand, because a lot of us get frustrated because we don't have people that's going to listen to us and all that. But we have to raise our campaign. We have to come up with our own newsletters and newspapers and books and different other things, so that we can begin to convince the people, you know, of what their mission is and what it should be. But most of our people are willing to become a part of move if they understand what it is, if they know that it exists. Mm-hmm. And our problem is for people to know that we exist, and we should continue to spread the word to others and bring them into our organizational activities.
Definitely, we'll see it definitely. Yeah, it's a serious movement about real change, about things that are actually going to really benefit our community and our people. If you're tired of everything that's been going on, if you're tired of just talking about the problem, you want to do something about it, join us here at The Struggle. I mean, visit us on our website, pg-rna.com. Support the Republic of New Africa, the efforts and everything that we're trying to do and build a nation. Stay tuned to the NABA network, the New African Broadcast Association, and participate in some of the things that we got going on, especially if you're local here in Idlewild City. And if you're not local, wherever you are, you know, if you appreciate some of the things that we've done, create your own program, because we can only gain our liberation through organization. We can't do it as individuals. We've been kind of trained on this individualism, but that's a part of a European value system that does not work for us. So, you know, collectively we can defeat this enemy, and we can build a better world, a better nation, because that's all what we're trying to do. But my name is Brother Prophecy. You've been listening and watching the Voices of New Africa with my comrade Elder Fadali. We will see y'all again next week. Free the land.
Free the land.
We always say the Black Panther Party that they can do anything they want to us. We might not be back. I might be in jail. I might be anywhere. But when I leave, you can remember I said